And this is a good example. Somebody has asked before, how do you know whether what you're reading is supposed to be taken as an historical account? Like we're just looking at actual events, event 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in order, or if you're supposed to be looking at something in a different way. And a lot of times the answer is you can just tell. And the way that you tell is not by the way that the editors have formatted the text in your Bible. Like if you look at chapter 35, and they have it set apart in broken lines like we would expect to see poetry. The fact that the editors have come along and broken something up does not make it poetry. It either was or wasn't beforehand. And there are places in the Bible where they have things broken that I don't think are necessarily poetic. And there are things that they don't have broken that I think are. And so when you're reading through the Bible, while sometimes the way modern editors format it is a key, it's not foolproof. It's kind of like the red letters in the New Testament. Some people have Bibles where they put the red letter text. That's not foolproof either, and it wasn't in the original. Jesus didn't speak with a red voice, and so there was no red text when it was originally written down. And there are a couple places that are red that I don't think should be, and there's one or two that maybe aren't red that might ought to be. And so we have to be careful that we don't take our cues necessarily from the editing of the Bible. But in this instance, I think they get it right. I think we can tell a difference just reading. In chapter 35, you move from this talk of this holy highway coming in the future, and you get to chapter 36, and there's a clear, all of a sudden, different tone, a different style. And so when we get to chapter 36, we're going to be looking at something that's historical. We're being told an accounting of events. And so in chapter 36, it starts off in the 14th year of King Hezekiah. Sennacherib, king of Assyria, came up against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. Well, what does that mean? It means in the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib came up against the fortified cities of Judah and took them. That's what it means, right? That's the difference between when you're reading in chapter 35 and when you're reading in chapter 36. And we ask this question, what will this highway called the way of holiness, what will that be? There will never be, at least not that I can foresee, right? There will never be a literal highway, an actual physical highway that God comes and puts on the face of the earth, and he puts the little highway signs over it indicating the way of holiness. That's not what we're talking about. But in chapter 36, we're dealing with pretty straightforward historical events, actual events that are recounted for us. Now, might there be some principles or other things that we can learn from them? Yes, definitely. But there's not anything in the text that would cause us to ask, what do these fortified cities of Judah, what do they stand for? That's not what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with an historical account. So, the king of Assyria sent the Rabshakeh from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. It's very unfortunate that Rabshakeh isn't a name. It's a title. What a cool name, right? Rabshakeh. So he sends this guy to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army. And he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field, and there came out to him Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who was over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and Joah, the son of Asaph, the recorder. Well, what's happening? What's happening? Isaiah is recounting a time when King Sennacherib has invaded the promised land. And he is taking the fortified cities of Judah. By the ancient Assyrian count, 43 fortified cities. And so he's marching through and he's just taking everything. And then he comes to Jerusalem. And he is going to send actually 3 people. There's a parallel account over in 2 Kings that we're not really going to get into right now, other than the fact that to see that he sends 3 people, which are answered by 3 of Hezekiah's people. He sends the Tartan, or the field marshal, the commander of this great force that is being sent. He sends the Rabsaris, a high-ranking court official. We can just think of him as like the court reporter. And then he sends this Rabshakeh, the highest official in the king's government. You might think of him as the highest civilian although there really wasn't this distinction between civilian and military personnel in the ancient world like we have in our country today. But we would think of him as the highest civilian after the king. So he sends three pretty important people to go talk to Hezekiah's three officials. Eliakim is head over the king's house, so he would be like the household manager, dealing with the daily affairs, like the chief of staff, perhaps, for a president, is who Eliakim would be. Shebna is the chief inspector of the military. When you read through, you look at it in verse 36, it says Shebna the secretary. Well, what does it mean? Do you answer the king's phone? What does that mean? Well, it's kind of like the secretary of the Navy, or the secretary of defense, or the secretary of state. This is somebody who is probably has the best idea of Judah's military capabilities. And then he sends Joab, a court official who is in charge of legal records. He's the recorder. He records what happens and translates those things or transmits those things to the king. So what's going on here is we see a king sending out emissaries or apostles. We might be familiar with that word. In the New Testament, we have a king who sent out emissaries or apostles or ambassadors to plead with people to make a decision to surrender their fortifications to the King of Kings. Right? That's kind of the opposite of what is happening here. Here we have the enemy attacking the Lord's people. Well, in the New Testament, you have the Lord sending out the emissaries, asking people walled up in the fortified cities of themselves, of their own will, of their own pride, of their own arrogance and conceit, sending out these emissaries, these apostles, begging people to surrender. Because it will be much better for you if you surrender than if you don't. To give yourself over to the will of the Lord instead of remaining in rebellion. So that's kind of one way that we can look at this and understand what's happening here with these 6 people meeting out in front of the city of Jerusalem. So then the Rabshakeh is going to come in verses 4 through 12. And we're not necessarily going to read everything that he says. But the Rabshakeh come and he says to Hezekiah, or he says to them, "Say to Hezekiah, thus says the great king, the king of Assyria, on what do you rest this trust of yours?" Now there's a couple things that we need to do. We need to go back actually to the beginning and ask, why does Isaiah tell us where they're meeting? Why is that important? Why does it matter that they are meeting at the upper pool, at the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field? Have you ever read that and be like, Isaiah, I don't care where they're meeting. What does it matter? It's like when we report and they talk about great summits or meetings that are happening throughout our modern history. When was the last time they gave you the address? And at 433 Elm Street, the great leaders of the world are coming together. Who cares? Why does that matter? So when we see that sometimes in historical accounts, not always, but sometimes when you see stuff like that in an account like this, that should give you pause and cause you to ask the question, why do I care that it's happening at the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field? Well, if you go back in Isaiah to chapter 7, Isaiah himself will go and meet King Ahaz at the exact same place. And when Isaiah goes to King Ahaz at that place, he calls upon him to put his trust in the Lord in a similar circumstance. Right? To trust that God will deliver the people of Israel. And it's in that conversation there that you get the great promise of the woman who will give birth to the child, who will be called Emmanuel, who will, before he knows how to choose the good from the bad, the enemies will be defeated. And that promise is fulfilled later in the New Testament through Jesus, when the young woman who hasn't known man gives birth to the child who delivers his people, who's named Jesus, or Emmanuel, God with us. And so that's why we're told the place. Because previously, God's people have been brought to this place and called upon to trust the Lord. And here, these officials from Assyria are coming and they're meeting Israel at the exact same place, and they are calling on Israel to distrust the Lord, to turn away from God, to not put your trust in this divine being who what has he done for you yet, as we have plowed you over and taken away your 43 fortified cities. Where has your God been up to this point? After the hurricane came in southeast Texas, I don't remember the exact context, but I remember there was a guy who was going around making a big deal, asking that very question, where is your God now? The same place he's always been. Everywhere and nowhere, at the same time. Allowing and disallowing, approving and disapproving, helping and not, doing all the things that God thinks is best. Being God, that's where my God is now. And it is very prideful and arrogant to think that my well-being and my fare in this world is what determines whether or not there is a God. How arrogant and conceited and self-centered and self-righteous, thinking that God owes me anything. And so this Rabshakeh comes and he calls out to these officials, on what do you rest this trust of yours? Calling on Israel to distrust a couple things. The next thing to notice is that he has very little respect for God, and he has absolutely no respect for Hezekiah as a king, because he just names Hezekiah, and then he talks about his king, the great king, the king Sennacherib of Assyria. And there's a couple reasons why. First, it is the defeat of Israel and Judah at Jerusalem is already a foregone conclusion. This is going to happen. But there is no way that Jerusalem will stand against the juggernaut of the Assyrian army, just like the other 43 fortified cities did not stand in the way of the juggernaut of the Assyrian army. Jerusalem will be plowed under like every other city before it, and unless you surrender and come out now, we will kill you all. Or, as he will so nicely describe later in the chapter, you will suffer incredibly while we besiege your city, and you will die from that. You pick. So it's a foregone conclusion. He also mentions in these verses 4 through 10, that Egypt is not going to come and help them. Right? Such is Pharaoh of Egypt to all who trust in him. He is like this broken reed of a staff that pierces the hand of those who lean on it. A very graphic picture. This Rabshakeh, this official that is sent to go and taunt Israel, he's pretty good at what he does. If you were listening to him, he's kind of convincing. Where was your God when we destroyed the other 43 cities? Where will Pharaoh be who's coming to help you? He can't get through our pickets. He can't get through the Assyrian army. You're all by yourself. And the next thing he's going to say is that not only can your king not protect you, but that your God has abandoned you. Your God has left you. Moreover, verse 10, is it without the Lord that I have come up against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go against this land and destroy it. Liar. But it doesn't matter that he's lying. What kind of tools does the enemy use? Did Satan lie to Eve in the garden? Oh, yes. How did he lie? Well, he took what God said and he inserted a single word. You shall not surely die. That was a lie. That was a lie. And we get upset when people lie to us and we say, well, that's not fair and it's not right. He should be telling the truth. No, he shouldn't. He's fighting for the other team. He's playing by the rules for the other team. Satan lies and cheats and murders and hurts and harms and does all kinds of things, which is why he will be justly judged, which is why he is a liar and a murderer from the beginning. And Jesus would argue with the scribes and the Pharisees in the New Testament. He said, when you speak out of your character because you are children of your father, Satan, who is a liar from the beginning. We shouldn't expect this man to show up and speak the truth. He is absolutely playing by the rules. And so when you get out and we are dealing with people who are on the enemy's team, don't expect them to speak the truth. Just understand that Satan is going to lie to you. He will lie. Not might lie. He will lie. And we have to be very careful that we listen, because actually what this man has done is he has taken a portion of the law, the blessings and the cursings over in places like Deuteronomy chapter 28. He has taken that and he is coming to them and he is trying to use the very law on which they base their entire life. He is trying to use that very law against them, saying clearly you all are disobedient and clearly God has left you because we have destroyed these other cities. And not only that, God told me, lie, to come and destroy you all. You are completely abandoned. That is what he is saying. So then, the officials in verses 11 through 12, apparently Rabshakeh, again, very, very brilliant, comes and he speaks in Hebrew. And so these officials come and they say, please speak in Aramaic, because we understand that. And that way the people on the wall won't hear what you're saying. The officials that Hezekiah sent out were not quite as skilled as the ones that Sennacherib sent. Because you have just told the man that what he is doing is working. You're saying World War II, the Japanese and the Germans and the Italians did this, and the United States did too. The Germans would get people who spoke English. Right? If you're going to be broadcasting to England, you get somebody who speaks the king's English. I was a king at the time. And if you're getting somebody who's going to be broadcasting to the Americans, you get somebody who speaks John Wayne's English. Right? And what you do is you broadcast messages to them. If you've ever seen the movie Saving Private Ryan, there's this little clip in there where they kind of make fun of it. And they have a German speaking over a loudspeaker saying, "The Statue of Liberty is kaput." First of all, they would never have done that. Right? They would have spoken in perfect English. We want you all to know everybody at home is dead. We've killed them all. We've invaded the United States. We've taken over New York. And we now have the statue of Hitler. Good night. It would be something more like that. Right? That's exactly what you do because you want people to understand in their own language that you're going to kill them all. And that you've already killed everybody at home. And so when Rabshakeh comes, that's what he does. He speaks in Hebrew. He's a very intelligent person. So we also have to understand that the enemy's agents aren't stupid. Right? To think that everybody who works for Satan must just be foolish. Well, they are foolish, but they're not stupid. This is a very, very intelligent, cunning, conniving individual. That's why he was sent. And so he comes and he's dealing with these people, and as soon as Hezekiah's people come out and they say, please don't speak in our language because we don't want them to hear. He's like, okay, fine. Let's continue in Hebrew. So warfare is dirty, and it's painful, and it's underhanded, it's devious, it's mischievous, and we should expect to deal with the same things in spiritual warfare. So then, continuing on, in verse 13, the Rabshakeh stood and called out in a loud voice in the language of Judah, "Hear the words of the great king, the king of Assyria." See, before he was just talking, now he's yelling. Thus says the king, do not let Hezekiah deceive you. He will not be able to deliver you. Do not let Hezekiah make you trust in the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city is not given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah. For thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace and come out to me, and each of you will eat of his own vine. And he goes on to talk about these wonderful things that will happen. And then he goes on to say, where are the gods of Hamath? This is down around verse 19. Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who among all the gods of these lands has delivered them out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? And there's a couple of mistakes that the Rabshakeh makes because he doesn't know God. And that's also Satan's mistake. He doesn't know God. He knows who he is. He doesn't really know him. Rabshakeh thinks that tearing down the high places was a bad thing. And to a polytheist, that is a bad thing. Why would you tear down altars to any god? The last thing you want is any god to be mad at you. And so tearing down the high places all around the Judah and Jerusalem would be bad in his eyes because you're offending God or the gods. He also says there were no other gods that have been able to stop them. Well, that's exactly right, because all the other gods are just statues. All the other gods are just ideas, dreamings, musings of humans. But this God that he has come up against to defy is alive. He is the living God. And he is different than these idols. So Rabshakeh says the king can't save you. Rabshakeh says the Lord can't save you. It would be best if you just came out and played nice. And when you look at the promises that he gives them, that each one of you will have your own vine, eat your own fig tree, and you will drink water from your own cistern, until I come and take you away to a land like your own land, a land of grain and wine, of bread and vineyards. Does that sound remotely familiar? It should, because it's very similar to the language that God used to describe the promised land, the place where God was going to bring his children. So this missionary comes, we'll call him the missionary of Satan. This emissary of King Sennacherib comes, and he offers false promises. Satan offers false promises too. Like, this man is telling you, if you come out, everything's going to be great. It will be good, or as good or better than what God is giving you, obviously, because we're about to kill you all. Satan says the exact same thing. What God says about marriage is not right. There are better ways to do this. What God says about charity and kindness and being generous is not exactly right. There are better ways to do this. I recently read a book by a man named Scott Adams. He's a creator of Gilbert, actually. And in his book, he makes a very persuasive case for being selfish. Selfish. Did I say shellfish? If I did, forget that. He makes a very persuasive case for being selfish. Selfish. He says by being selfish is the best way to accomplish the most good. By storing up everything that you could ever want and getting everything that you could ever want, that is the best way to help people who are in need. It's a very persuasive argument when you listen to it. It's much more eloquent than that. It's much more complicated than that. But his argument is basically that in order for you to be generous, you first have to be incredibly selfish and get a huge house and many cars and everything you could ever desire. And then, after you have satisfied all of the passions of your own flesh, then you can begin to become generous. It sounds great. And it tells you exactly what you want to hear. You can still do all the good things that God has said. You can just do it a different way. A way that you like. A way that is better than God's way. That's exactly what this guy is doing. It's exactly what Satan has always done. It is trying to show us that what God says isn't the right way to do it. Maybe there's a better way. And what we see Jesus saying, who disagrees starkly with Mr. Adams, who is a cartoonist. I don't know how being a cartoonist qualifies him to tell you how to deal with your personal finances and spiritual life. Apparently there's some kind of class somewhere that they go to. Jesus disagrees. Jesus says to use what you have today to help with today. And the idea or the point behind having possessions is not to store them up. The point of having possessions is to use them. And if they don't happen to all be used today, then you have extra to use tomorrow, to share and to help. It's very interesting that in Ephesians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul, who agrees with Jesus, says, "Let him who stole steal no longer, but work with his own hands so that he can be selfish and store up as much as he wants. And when he finally has everything he wants, then he can share with others." It's actually not what it says. Let him who stole steal no longer, but work with his own hands so that he may have something to share. That's the point of possessions. And as we look through this, chapter 36, and we look at the way that this man is dealing with Israel, it is no different than the way that Satan deals with us and has dealt with humans throughout all time. And we see at various times, I think we can see Satan working with and through people and individuals. And you can totally see that here. When you get to chapter 37 next time, we're going to see what happens when Hezekiah and Israel go and seek the Lord's help. And we're going to see a good example. We're going to include the end of chapter 36 into next week when we're looking at chapter 37. So if you get a chance to read that, go ahead and look at it and see how we ought to respond with these things and whom we ought to put our trust in. Thank you very much for your attention. It's time to be dismissed our classes.